All right, we are going to get started. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Adam, who's going to be speaking to us about lessons learned, long-term retention, and monitoring in digital therapeutic trials. And I think this links very nicely to the last panel where we talked about user-centric experiences and the importance of patient engagement and retention. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right. Just give a second here for the slides to come up. Perfect. Thanks so much. All right. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining the talk here. I know it's been a long day, lots of great discussions. So I'll try and make the best use of everybody's time here. My name is Adam Samson. I'm the Senior Director of Clinical Operations at Curebase. Curebase is a provider of software and services in the decentralized clinical trial space. So lots of talk today about the importance of clinical evidence when bringing your digital therapeutics to market. So Curebase is a partner in helping you do that. A bit about my background. So I actually started as a clinician. I worked directly with patients in the conduct of clinical trials, moved into roles within CROs around monitoring, project management, spent a few years at Duke, and was at a large pharmaceutical company before joining Curebase. So I had really the opportunity throughout my career to get a sense of why it's so important that we, like many other industries, embrace technology within these type of trials. Before I hop in, maybe just to get a sense of the audience's experience with clinical trials, by show of hands, those who've kind of been on the end of conducting clinical trials, either through your own companies or through outsourced providers? Great, so most people. And how about since the pandemic, since we've now had kind of a shift in how we do things in a more decentralized way? Perfect. So it seems like, yeah, I can probably skip through much of this first slide that I have here, but what we're going to really focus on today in our limited amount of time is deep dive into some of what we've learned at Curebase in conducting these type of trials in terms of long-term retention and how to monitor participants throughout these trials to really make sure that you're successful in getting your DTx to market. Just a couple of terms here, even though we've all, it seems like almost everybody has been doing this, just to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. When I talk about traditional clinical trials, this is where, we have the study activities primarily conducted in person at a dedicated research site. For the most part, we're collecting data on paper. I know it's crazy, right? But collecting data on paper, we're still doing it and transcribing it into an electronic system. That in contrast to what's being really touted now as decentralized clinical trials, which means many things to many people. For the purpose of this talk here today, we're going to focus on it being, including at least some remote elements. So that might be telemedicine or others, and other non-site-based activities. This might be mobile phlebotomy or other, mobile healthcare providers that we use. When we talk about fully virtual studies, this means everything's conducted remotely, right? So we're perhaps, everything that you might do with the participant in terms of collecting data from them, patient-reported outcomes and everything else is done in the home. Whereas hybrid, we might use a combination. Maybe it makes sense as part of determining eligibility for the trial that the participant actually goes into a clinician to have that first experience. And then perhaps we can do the rest of it from the comfort of their home. So now that we've level set there, I wanted to take us through a real case study. We've done a number of DTx studies. This one in particular, so it was a decentralized trial for a digital therapeutic in IBS, and it was for FDA submission, going the 510K route. The sponsor, before coming to Curebase, I will say it's been, this was nearly 2 years ago. We're coming towards the end of this study now. When they were, looking at the right partner for these for their study. They were looking at traditional CROs and finding that the proposals that were coming back, especially at that time, right, were primarily the traditional model, so the site-based model. Couple problems with that. One is cost, right? I mean, it's really expensive to do studies in this way where we have to collect on paper, put in an electronic system, send people out to do monitoring. Another reason is, timelines. All of that, getting these sites up to speed takes a lot of time, right? Because you have to be able to get everybody up and going. And then also the intended use of the DTx. So a lot of what we heard earlier in the day from the keynote speakers, right, is payers want to see things that align well with how it's actually going to be used in the real world. So if this DTx, they're anticipating getting it out onto the market, they're not planning on having patients coming into the clinician's office to deliver this digital therapeutic, right? So collecting those data at home really is in line with real world. So the solution that we came up with, that Curebase along with the sponsor came up with, was deciding this was better suited for a hybrid design. Today we might even have done it fully virtual, but at the time, the sponsor really liked the idea of some of that initial interaction happening in a clinic. So much of that happened as early on, kind of to walk you through it, right? We would identify participants at one of a number of different providers. We have remote coordinators that work for us at Curebase who could help to have the initial conversations, even go through the consenting process, make sure they're really good candidates before they go into the clinic. And ultimately, right, so taking this hybrid approach, using our software. So our software has that e-consent, it has the e-pro, it has the e-source, so you can collect everything within the platform, as well as our coordinator staff, project managers to align well with the product and make sure everything's successful. We were really able to do some great things here for the client. So 27 physicians activated in 8 weeks, 700 participants enrolled in 5 months. Now, yeah, anybody who's conducted a clinical trial knows, those numbers are pretty good. But the biggest thing here is the 95% retention. And again, going back to the talk this morning from the keynote, I mean, retention is everything, especially when you're talking about now we're almost done with this study. We're almost 2 years in, and we still have 95% of the people in. And just kind of reflecting on, why retention is important. Well, a couple reasons, right? I mean, if you end up with poor retention in your study, you basically have to go one of two ways. One is, you're going to end up having to reopen enrollment, which is costly and extends the timeline. Or the worst is you end up with not enough patients that complete. So now, you're not powered sufficiently to really understand whether your therapeutic is efficacious and safe. So extremely important stuff to think about when doing these type of studies. So wanted to walk you through this case study here, but really also want to dive in deep onto these two main things, these themes that we're talking about here today, starting off with long-term retention. So when thinking about long-term retention, as much as we, at Curebase, we're about half software folks and half clinical folks like myself. We feel like we kind of got the best of both worlds. Software alone isn't enough. I wouldn't tell my engineers that, right? They think we can. Software is very important, but having somebody on the other end to really be that, personal touch so that participants know if I want to get in touch with somebody because I'm struggling with something, they have a way to get in touch with the coordinator staff. It really makes a huge difference in these type of trials. And having, whether it's hybrid, fully virtual, or traditional, having these touch points, having participant engagement and communication really well thought out. I think that, when I was a coordinator conducting trials some time ago, we didn't really think as much about, okay, there's going to be 3 months between this next visit. Are we going to, how are we going to continue keeping this participant engaged in the study? It was just kind of assumed that, as clinicians, like, oh, they'll come back. Well, now what we realize is if you want to maintain these participants, and especially in a virtual world, you have to be able to map out that participant's journey and understand touch points where you're most likely to have drop off, and then incorporate things. It doesn't necessarily have to always be, a interactive call where they're with a coordinator, but know your participant's preferred method too, right? So depending on your patient population, if this is millennials and you try and pick up the phone and call them, good luck, right? I mean, leave a voicemail, they're not going to listen to it. So yeah, getting to know them, getting to know, all right, text is probably going to work better for this group. It makes a huge difference. And being thoughtful about those things, putting together at the beginning of your trial a participant communication plan so it's very clear and you have metrics to track against so you can be sure that you're hitting those milestones. And then just one more point to note here. So encourage participants to reach out. I think sometimes people feel like they're, being burdensome if you don't really express to them that, we're here for you, and give them the ways to do that. So just giving them a number on a piece of paper at the beginning of the study is not enough. We have, and other platforms, I'm sure, a little thing in the corner, right? Chat with us. This is what you want. You want something very easy for them to be able to get in touch with you. Diving more into long-term retention. So make participation easy and, dare I say, fun. I know this almost seems like, again, clinical trials seemed like a much more just too sterile of a kind of experience when I first started, where it almost felt wrong to try and use the word fun, right? And I'm starting to see more and more, and in our discussions with regulators and with IRBs, they have nothing wrong with that. They see nothing wrong with that, right? Of making this participant's experience in the trial actually something that can be enjoyable, that they can enjoy interacting with the coordinators, that they have the platform that they're using, the software is user-friendly and is something that they get some enjoyment out of it, whether it's just through reporting their outcomes every day or some form of gamification. We're continuing to try and find ways where we can make that experience more enjoyable. Give participants options whenever possible. This is challenging. So anybody who's in clinical trials, someone who needs no introduction, Craig Glipsit, he has a really good kind of theme that he puts out a lot, which is, this week I might want to go to the grocery store to get my groceries. Next week, maybe I want to order them on my phone and have them delivered to my house. Can we bring this kind of thing into clinical trials? It's not like groundbreaking, right? I mean, it's something that as consumers, we expect that type of flexibility. We're just not doing that a lot in clinical trials. On the flip side of that, we need to keep in mind, this crazy figure or image here, right, kind of demonstrates this rapidly expanding complexity of the ecosystem that is a clinical trial. And another person I follow very closely, Ken Getz out of Tufts University, likes to pull us back to reality and say, keep in mind, decentralized clinical trials are great, but at the same time, you're increasing complexity in your studies. So we can't kind of over-evangelize, right? We have to understand that if you're going to conduct trials in this way, you need to be able to mitigate for all these risks. You need to be able to understand exactly where those pain points might be in order to be successful. So we talked about mapping the participant journey, identifying key points in the study to provide positive reinforcement. So of course we want to be able to provide participants with compensation for their time. I mean, it's only fair, right? They are contributing stakeholders in these studies, and we want to be able to compensate them for it. It's really nice when you have a platform that can institute even micropayments, we're calling them now, right? For if somebody's going to do a patient-reported outcome every single day, maybe they get a little something every day as they complete it. But it doesn't always have to be compensation either. I mean, stuff that we've heard from our participants, even little things like just, at certain points, thanking them. I mean, that can make such a big impact to them. Or, when you do your interim analysis, or certainly when you do your final analysis, you let everybody else know about the results of the study. take some time, put together a one-page document about the results, run that through the IRB and share it with your participants. These are the things that really make participants feel appreciated above and beyond compensation from everything that we've heard with our participants. And then conducting UX research, which I think for this crowd, in the pharma space, that's a very novel concept, right? But everybody here is very used to that. It's really important, and that's something that we're increasingly trying to do, is to understand the patient population during study design, start building out our platform, similar to like you would for your DTx, right? You want to know if the end users are going to be happy with the product. Well, we want to do the same thing with the actual clinical platform where we'll be collecting data. And that's the perfect time to try and test that connection between your DTx and your clinical database. When you can integrate, that's where the real power comes. Again, avoid manual transcription like the plague whenever you can, and try and make it so that integration is there. It'll decrease your needs for actually doing verification between these two systems. Shifting gears a bit to the participant monitoring. So optimizing data collection and accessibility. So having access to your data in a meaningful way is everything in a clinical trial. If you want to be able to keep track of how your participants are doing and to be able to be proactive, it's absolutely necessary. And that's the key here, is not just sitting back and kind of waiting and being reactive when you find out that, oh, we've lost 20% of our participants, but being proactive, seeing early signs. If it's, again, a patient-reported outcome that's being administered every day, you can get a pretty good sense if somebody is, 3 or 4 days in and they haven't answered their questionnaires. All right, this might be an opportunity for us to go ahead and jump in and have a coordinator get on a call with them. But if you wait 3 or 4 weeks, that's an eternity, right, in one of these studies, and you end up in a position where you can't use the data for this participant. So avoid paper-based data collection. I know I've hit this a couple times, but really, wherever you can. I was a regional monitor for a long time for a large CRO. In order to make sure that the site is recording on paper and that it's the same in the electronic database, you got to go out there. You can't send people out there every day, right? So you're going out there every 4 to 6 weeks. It's just too long. So really try and get real-time access to your data by having the data the first time entered into an electronic system. Select options which are providing you with that real-time access to data, and stay away from manual transcription of data whenever possible, not just because it doesn't give you real-time access, but because it absolutely impacts the fidelity of how that data is transcribed from one system to the next. And this doesn't necessarily always have to mean the paper-based to an electronic. As we're transitioning into this world where things are being put into electronic databases, even the first time, right? A lot of times the EMR isn't talking to some other system, and integrating between the EMR and your clinical database can be quite challenging. Whenever you can, try and build those bridges. And when you can't, just really know up front that that's going to be something you have to mitigate for. And then collecting usability data from patients and other users. This is, again, another way to know in real time, not just about your clinical database, but about your DTx, right? Trying to really understand holistically where the pain points are, and what the participants' experience is like in the studies, and then adapting accordingly. Don't underestimate the value of quality analytics, and don't let them be an afterthought. This is a lesson that we learned the hard way, right? And I think that a lot of times you see this. We're so excited to get the study, to get that first patient in, that we're rushing to get the database turned on. And then we get the first couple patients in, and we're scrambling to really understand, the full scope of what's happening, like exactly where participants are screen failing and things like that. This should be, and what it is now for us, part of the design process. We want to know very early on the different stakeholders too, right? So we have principal investigators that have a certain, certain data and things that they need to be able to see to know how participants are doing. My project managers need to see a whole different set. So these discussions take time, and you need to be able to have them early on in order to have it ready to go when you flip that switch to go live. Knowing what those meaningful metrics are, and setting thresholds. So we have a lot happening in regulations right now. ICH, E6 and E8, these are two, governing really across the world that everybody looks to. They're focusing a lot on quality by design, quality tolerance limits. So doing these kind of things not only will make your study run better, but it will make your data more acceptable to regulators when you do get it to them. And then empower the entire study team to make data-driven decisions. So you've figured out what they need in order to be able to see what's happening with participants. Now give them some authority to actually make decisions in real time and train them how to do it. Again, just kind of releasing dashboards to people doesn't always do the trick. You need to be able to let them know, if this threshold happens, then what, right? So we talked about that participant communication plan. So if somebody goes X number of days without answering, then we do this. If they don't answer, then that, right? So lots to consider around participant monitoring. And just know that everything that you do on the front end to address these things will really pay dividends on the back end. We like to say, right, it's not first patient in that matters, it's last patient in that matters. So try and think in the long term. I do want to leave some time for questions. A couple quick takeaways. Retraining participants, hugely important, as we all know. Software isn't enough. Make sure that you have a team of real people that can be on the other end of the line. Don't try and take a one-size-fits-all approach. Would make my job much easier if we could, but more boring, I guess. Make sure that you know your participant or your patient population and reduce burden wherever possible. Know where your data will reside and how those data sources will combine. Whenever you can, avoid manual transcription. And identify the data that will provide you the most meaningful insights early on, and then develop actions around different thresholds that might be met. So with that, we have about 3.5 minutes left. I'm glad to answer any questions anybody might have. Yes, please.
One question I had is, I love the idea of checking in with patients regularly. I mean, 95% retention is very impressive.
Thank you.
I guess I wondered, do you have any fears about that skewing your clinical outcomes if that's not how that product will be used post-trial? Like in terms of presenting that data to the FDA, for example, are they going to go, yeah, because you had someone checking in and encouraging them to keep using it? Is that really how it's going to be used in the real world?
It's a very good point, right? And so one thing I always recommend is, right, talk to regulators early and often as you're designing your study. In this particular study, the actual treatment period itself was only 3 months. But regulators and payers increasingly want to see this long-term data, right? It's like, okay, great, you can move the needle in 3 months, but what's it look like 2 years, 1 year, 2 years later? So making sure that you're absolutely right, that the follow-up that you have with these participants is appropriate, and that what's being delivered isn't necessarily supporting the treatment so much as supporting the clinical trial process to try and keep them engaged in the platform and make it so that they don't forget about the platform. That might ultimately not help, in this case, their IBS symptoms, but it'll keep them going back and answering those questionnaires so that we know what those outcomes look like. Please.
I had a quick question regarding what studies make good candidates for fully remote, decentralized trial versus a hybrid model. Are there certain indications or maybe study designs that warrants one over the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to answer that. So definitely what we find, when you talk about hybrid, just about any study can benefit from some sort of aspect of decentralized trials now, right? So whether that's eConsent or ePro, whether it's DTx or drug or device, increasingly regulators want to know what it's like in the patient population. So they like to have patient-reported outcomes. And even if your study needs to be conducted in clinic, having the patients be able to tell you in their own words how things are going is something that I would recommend for any study. Fully virtual, I would say only maybe 5 to 10% of studies right now are good candidates for that. Because oftentimes, it takes something like oncology or other things, right, where, it makes sense to have participants going into the clinic either to have, administration of the drug, or for them to have, some sort of assessment, whether it's an eligibility assessment, it could be an MRI or some other means. Now, a lot of studies, I kind of see it like on a spectrum, right? So we can have hybrid where they only go into a clinic one time and everything else happens remotely. And what we try and do at this point is, what's going to be best for the participant, not so much the cost driver. In the end, these trials tend to save some money, but do the participants want to come in some, or would they rather do most of it from home? Can we send a mobile phlebotomist so that they don't necessarily have to go in for this blood draw? But regardless of the therapeutic area, I would say consider some aspects of decentralization.
We've got a few questions from the online audience as well.
Yeah.
So the first one is, how do adaptations of the methods to give participants options affect reliability and validity? And do we need to, and can we adjust our statistics in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure a statistician on your team would definitely want to be involved in those discussions. It's really early days in these kind of things, I will say that. And it's going to be highly dependent on what exactly the procedure is that's being done. If it's a safety lab, right? If all that's really being done is either they're going to have their blood drawn at home or they're going to have it drawn in clinic, something like that, maybe the patient doesn't really want somebody coming into their home. Now, if it's going to be something where you're actually administering something that could have a subjective impact on one of their primary endpoints, in that case, probably optionality isn't the right choice for that.
And then the final question we've got is, do you have any insights regarding reliable methods of remote recruitment? Reliable
methods of remote recruitment. So we do a ton of remote recruitment. And it definitely depends on what your therapeutic area is and also what eligibility looks like for this trial. So we've got a lot of success with doing digital advertisement, whether it's through Google or, depending on your patient population, Bing, right? Trying to reach your patients where they are. But then you really need to focus on, like we did a study in Lyme disease where we needed to catch these participants at a very specific stage while they were just diagnosed and before they were too long on antibiotics. Well, try running a Facebook ad that says, were you just very recently diagnosed with Lyme disease, right? It doesn't work. So you have to take a flexible approach. We found some referral partners that were in endemic regions. We were able to do everything remote, but have participants referred in that way. So flex a bit, but digital ads often do the trick for many studies. Great. Well, I do think I'm probably a little bit over. Thanks so much, everyone. Adam at Curebase.com. We have a booth here. Hope to talk to everybody.